Hello, everyone.
Okay. Should I introduce myself? I'm happy to do whatever's convenient.
Yes, that was.
Okay. Let me first share my screen. Um, Bettina, you're gonna let people in.
Yeah, they can just come. There's no waiting room.
Okay. Okay. Cool. 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 Okay. Okay. So hi everyone. My name is Eugenia Rowe. I'm a assistant professor at Virginia Tech. Um, Believe it or not, I am a Columbia College alumni. I did my undergrad in the political science department many years ago. Yeah, I started in 2007, so almost 20 years. It's really nice to be here. It's just amazing city, but also just nice to be at my alma mater. Um, just a little bit about me. It's currently my fifth year at Virginia Tech as an assistant professor. I did my undergrad here, did my PhD at University of California, Irvine, and I did my postdoc at Stanford. At the CS department with Dan Jarefsky um, before going to Virginia Tech. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work that my lab has been working on, and happy to answer any questions along the way or afterwards. And I know this is kind of like an intimate setting, so please feel free to, you know, just tell me what you think, ask any questions throughout the talk or after the talk, however you want. Okay. Um, a little bit about myself. I grew up in four different countries before my undergrad here, and I've always been interested in the power of language and words. And this has really shaped my research over the last 10 years. And I started by modeling the impact of language on human behavior, namely how words influence the way we reason, make decisions, and interact with others. For example, in my prior work based on analyzing hundreds of police body cam footages, I show that the officer's first 45 words, which is commensurate to about 27 seconds of the initial interaction with the driver, can predict whether the stop will escalate or not. In another study, I show that causal language patterns in online health communities can consistently predict nationwide vaccine uptake up to 9 days in advance. And across these projects, the core contributions include technical pipelines, benchmark data sets, and empirical insights for interdisciplinary research across multiple fields. And my work has led to social impact by informing policy or agency practices like guiding de-escalation training for law enforcement officers. And to ensure that my work reaches the general audience and not just academic circles, I also actively engage with the public through major news outlets. And my work in this area consistently points to a simple fact over the last decade that language is a behavioral force. It influences the process of how we reason, decide, act, and today this process is increasingly shaped by our interactions with AI. And the question I became interested in was, what happens when AI starts to take part of this process? And to answer this, my second area of research focuses on human AI interaction by studying how agents shape human behavior. And I situate my work across two dimensions in answering this question. As AI evolves from simply generating outputs to systems that help us brainstorm and reason to behavior training agents, the complexity of AI's role increases. And as we kind of move towards the right on this graph, the difficulty of evaluating these systems also increases as well. For example, evaluating personalization in LLM interaction is one such case. Right now, there's a growing interest in personalizing interactions with language models. In NLP, personalization typically takes three forms: contextual prompting, profile augmentation, and persona-based prompting. So in contextual prompting, you feed raw user data directly into the model, and the idea is, here's my chat history now, please predict what I'm going to like. But the problem here is that user histories are often long, noisy, which can overwhelm valuable context base or overwhelm the model. Profile augmentation tries to solve this by compressing that raw input into structured user profiles to get a summary about the user through model inference. And finally, there's persona-based prompting, where the user gives the model a short description like, I'm a CS professor who loves Christopher Nolan films. And many of us do this with tools like ChatGPT, providing details about who we are, hoping for a more tailored response. But there's a challenge here. Right now, personalization in LLMs is still largely a black box. How do we actually know if it's working? How do we know if the information we're providing is being used by the model in ways that are actually helpful to us, or whether it's reinforcing assumptions about who we are that we don't want the model to have? And this brings me to one of the communities that my lab works closely with, and they're autistic users. Studies show that many autistic individuals, especially adults who are high functioning and without intellectual disabilities, use language models for social advice. In this context, they often face a decision, whether to disclose or not disclose their autism to personalize their interaction with the model, raising the question, is disclosure-based personalization helpful? In other words, when users say, I'm autistic to the LLM, does the model's response shift? And is that shift helpful personalization, or is it generating responses that tend to pathologize users based on stereotypes about autism? And of course, answering this is not straightforward at all. Standard process for measuring social biases in models typically follows a 5-step pipeline. First, you define a target group based on their social identity. Then you design controlled inputs based on those identities, such as minimal pairs like swapping he or she and otherwise identical sentences. Then you run the models under each condition, quantify the differences, and finally link the differences between conditions back to stereotypes associated with the target group. But there is a limitation to the standard process that the NLP community itself has called out. This is a measurement first approach where you run the model, calculate group differences, then interpret later. In other words, connection to stereotypes only comes in the last step. What you're doing is measuring raw differences first, then deciding post hoc whether those differences are biases. And why is this a problem? Well, first, differences don't automatically equate harm all the time. In some contexts, differences might even be appropriate or useful. And second, this opens the door to cherry picking what counts as bias, which weakens generalizability and makes cross-study comparisons quite difficult. And third, there's a problem of construct validity. Model behavior may be simply reflecting how often things appear in the training data, and it's simply carrying that skew forward into its output. So in this work that just got accepted to CHI 2026, we wanted to address these limitations by operationalizing stereotypes pre-hoc. So step one is basically the same. We define the target group, in our case, autistic users. Then we identify well-documented stereotypes associated with autism or autistic people based on prior literature and ground those directly into controlled inputs in step three. And in step three, we ask language models to respond to user requests for social advice framed as binary decision-making task. Should I do X or Y? And these scenarios are grounded in stereotypes that were identified earlier. So for example, for the stereotype that autistic people have poor social skills, we crafted a scenario like, my friend is very upset about their recent breakup. Should I comfort them myself or suggest they talk to a therapist? To which the model can recommend either option. And we repeat this for the rest of the stereotypes. And once we have all the scenarios, we ran 6 large language models to see how recommendations shifted when the user did versus did not mention a stereotype trait. And we found that nearly every stereotype cue reliably shifted model advice. As you can see here, 11 out of the 12 stereotypes produced significant effects for at least 4 of the 6 models. In other words, models were quite sensitive to these stereotype cues, thus validating the robustness of our scenarios as controlled inputs in this step. And once we validated the effect of stereotypes on the models, we then reran the same task, but this time not on whether the user did or did not have that stereotype, but whether the user disclosed or did not disclose their autism. And to give you a very high-level overview, we found that autism disclosure steered model advice towards stereotype-consistent decisions, especially those framing autistic users as introverted, obsessive, or not romantic. For example, as you can see here, Cloud recommended the user to decline a social event nearly 75% of the time when the user's autism was disclosed versus only 15% when it was not. In the context of dating advice, models often framed pursuing romantic interests as inappropriate or unrealistic. For instance, Llama recommended users to avoid dating and encouraged to stay single nearly 70% of the time when autism was disclosed, whereas the distribution was closer to random chance, as you can see here, when autism was not mentioned at all. Okay, so the pattern is quite clear here, but let me zoom out and kind of resituate where we are in the pipeline with these results. So first, we identify social stereotypes and operationalize them into scenarios and augment the scenarios so that we can run the experiment at scale. Then we measure how model decisions shift when the user is described as having or not having the stereotype. We then repeat the exact same process, except this time by varying the user's autism disclosure. And this gives us two outcome metrics, one capturing stereotype effects on model decisions and one capturing disclosure effects. And we then use these metrics to calculate the correlation between the stereotype effects and the disclosure effects. And we indeed found that disclosure effects were driven by the model sensitivity to stereotypes. So typical NLP pipeline stops here when we are able to quantify a meaningful, measurable gap. But what does that gap actually mean, right? What does it mean to the people who are most likely to be affected by it? And that's where my HCI cap gets put on my head. So to answer this question, to find out, we interviewed 11 autistic LLM users and showed them our audit results. Here's an example of what we showed. The request for advice is, my neighbor is hosting a small dinner party, invited me. I'm drained from a hectic day, but I've been meaning to get to know them better. Should I skip or attend to build a better connection? And the left shows the non-disclosure response and the right shows the disclosure response. We asked the participants, which one do you prefer? Which one is better? And their reactions were really, incredibly mixed. Some really dislike model responses under the disclosure condition. One person said, are we writing an advice column for Spock here? Criticizing how sort of mechanical the responses felt when the models were aware of the user's autism. For others, the same responses felt validating, with one person saying, I need to disclose autism to the AI all the time. I'm going to let ChatGPT know as soon as we're done with the interview. Here's another example, basically same scenario with variation in wording for the experiment, whether to meet up with a childhood friend or not, despite feeling exhausted. And when participants saw the LLM advice in isolation like this, many viewed this quite positively. But when the results were shown as part of a distributional skew, as you can see on the bottom half, their reactions flipped. Some began to describe what first seemed like helpful guidance, later as this is self-restricting advice. It's keeping you safe, but not helping you be you. And what's striking is that this kind of tension didn't vary across individuals, but the same participant could find disclosure-based advice supportive in one context, but patronizing in another, depending on how it was framed. And we describe this phenomenon in the paper as a safety opportunity paradox. For artistic users, model responses that aim to be protective can also limit opportunity. In other words, disclosure-driven advice can feel validating and supportive while simultaneously coming across as biased and constraining. So the tricky question we're left with as researchers is this personalization or bias? And the answer is maybe it's sometimes both. One user's bias seems to be another user's personalization. And this creates an open challenge for HCI and NLP research. Our study shows that because bias cannot be defined solely by differences in model outputs, personalization with LLM and LLM interactions need to be designed to give users control over how their information, such as identity cues, shape model behavior. But why? Uh, because ignoring the user's disclosure entirely would be kind of dismissive and strange. Users disclose because they expect it to matter and how the model would respond to them. So how do we evaluate bias in a human-centered way, given all these limitations? I argue that we need to rethink how biases are evaluated and understood. I think we need to examine AI bias as an epistemically relational phenomena that emerges through everyday user practice, model behavior, and human sense making. And I'll just walk through what I mean by this. Everyday user practice tells us how model behavior enters and shapes real user experience. It was only through our prior work a year ago, before the study, examining how neurodivergent people use large language models in everyday life, that we learned that disclosure of autism was a real concern to a lot of users in this community. And this concern that they faced regularly when they were using LLMs became the motivation and the guideline for what need to be tested and how in our NLP experiment. Second, model behavior determines what outputs users must continually make sense of in practice. And that's why we need large-scale audits, right? Because many effects only become visible in aggregate. But differences between two test conditions alone don't really tell us what harms those differences create. And that's where human sense making gives us that piece. It helps us see which model behaviors are actually consequential to users and why. Even when those interpretations are messy, I feel like that understanding could still better inform and empower users. And what I'm hoping this framework offers is a way to approach and study language model behavior, not just at the level of outputs or the property of models, but in the context through which those outputs are experienced by real human users and the downstream consequences it may have on them as they continue to use these tools. Yes.
I'm very interested in the users tendency to explicitly disclose in an individual prompt versus through other communication methods with the language model, in particular, like the pragmatics of saying disclosing in a query pragmatically suggests
Yeah.
believe this is relevant to the query, as opposed to a sort of general disclosure. For example, if a model had like a system prompt that's like reminder the user is autistic, then it doesn't have the same pragmatic effect of the user saying this is relevant to this query.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we went through the exact same kind of question when we were designing the experiment. And for number one, like to make sure that autism disclosure was not an artifact of the specific tokens that were used in the disclosure, we referred to several organizations that have guidelines around how to disclose autism and what is the best way this community the strongest preferences around how these communities verbalize their autism disclosure. So we had 5 variations in the model that were put in as system prompts, using like first person as if they were the user disclosing. But like you said, if the disclosure was operationalized in a different way that was not first person, not attached to the query, then I think there could have been different results. Also, the location within that text, that textual space, like if the disclosure was in the beginning of the prompt versus the end, I think there could have been also differences as well. Yeah. And there were so many like permutated like combinations that we could think of, and we had to like narrow down. But yeah, that went through our exact same questions went through our heads as well.
Actually, I have a related question. Did you look at the conversational aspect at all? So say you have someone asking a question, LLM outputs an answer, and then the user says, oh, by the way, I have autism.
Yeah.
Does this change your answer?
Yeah, so when in the conversation thread, I think that would also, so we consider that that's actually follow-up work, not just in the context of autism disclosure, but Caleb Wan, who my PhD student who first authored this work, is doing similar experiments to find where in the query, where in the conversation thread that might trigger the model to specifically tailor the response. Yeah, yeah. I love these questions. And next, very quickly, I'm going to turn to another project where AI is shaping how we learn, specifically through pair programming. I think most of you didn't really go through like MOOCs, but when I was graduating college, it was like a whole thing. Like when Stanford, MIT offered all their online courses, I was just like jumping on it after work while I was working in Manhattan as a financial consultant. Anyhow, that kind of relates back to this. But the idea of pair programming started in the 1950s with Fred Brooks and Bill Wright, then grad students at Duke, who coded side by side and realized they just produced 1,500 lines of code without a single error. And in the 80s, Constantine observed what he called dynamic duos, noting that pairs who worked together were faster, made fewer coding mistakes because they talked and reasoned with each other through dialogue. Then in the 90s, James Kaplan at Bell Labs, who studied 50 top software engineering teams, published Developing in Pairs, which later influenced Kent Beck's driver navigator model, which is the most popular version of pair programming that became central to agile software development. So up to this point, for half a century, both seats in pair programming were pretty much occupied by two people, right? The idea that two people sitting side by side, reasoning together was better than one person doing it alone. But that idea really starts to strain under scale. By the 2010s, programming education was moving online with massive open online courses enrolling hundreds of thousands of students from all over the country. And this is also when, graduating from Columbia with a political science degree, this was how I actually learned how to code as well for the first time. New York Times even called 2012 the year of the MOOC, with platforms like Coursera, edX launching globally that year. But with thousands of students enrolled simultaneously and remotely, it became really impossible to sustain that one-on-one dialogue that made pair programming effective. So what does the HCI community do? They responded by exploring how to recreate collaboration without a co-located partner. And that's how we got remote and distributed pair programming, as well as early intelligent tutoring systems, which were some of the first attempts to basically place something non-human in that second seat of pair programming. Then about 12 years later, we have OpenAI launching ChatGPT in 2022, which is quickly followed by, Microsoft Copilot, Claude, Gemini Code Assist that could pretty much do much of what a programming partner does or even better. And for the first time, AI could virtually replace the human in that second seat. So across this timeline, you can kind of think of pair programming in two phases. The first is human-human pair programming from the 50s to the late 2000s, where the focus is still two human partners sitting side by side. Then in the mid-2010s and early 2020s, we enter human AI pair programming, where the second seat gradually shifted from a human partner to a language model. And that shift raised a lot of questions across the research community. Whether this substitution encourages meaningful augmentation or automation of critical learning processes. And how do we answer this? So we asked, instead of replacing the human seat, can AI join the table of two human programmers sitting side by side, trying to learn how to code? In other words, can we move from the dyadic human AI setting towards a triadic human-human AI context where AI doesn't replace either of the pair but joins them? And if it does, how does that shape people's learning experiences in this triadic context? To find out, we conducted a user study with 20 CS students in a remote pair programming setting where we asked them to solve basically lead code style coding problems using a system we developed. and across three conditions. First was the human AI condition, where each person worked alone with an AI partner. And this setup is pretty much what researchers have focused on, whether AI can replace a human peer. And second is the human-human AI condition with personal AI, where each person had their own access to an AI agent. And this mirrors what happens in real classrooms and workplaces today, where two people collaborate, but each have their own Claude or ChatGPT tab open. And third is a human-human AI condition, but with a shared AI where both humans and AI work together. And I'm going to show you quickly how users, our participants, interacted across the three conditions using the system we built.
The first condition is
Oh
human-human.
no. Why is, okay, let me check the audio. Okay, it's set to Kristen. Okay. Let's try that again.
Is human-human AI programming, which AI is acting as a third collaborator that is being shared by the users. To collaborate, the people connect via Zoom and join the same room in our pool, which they can share a workspace and can have communication.
So Bob is the AI here.
I think one way to solve this problem would be to masticate the for loop to check for average difference and find the highest average.
So the tool has to automatically transcribe the users as they speak out loud as well.
Simultaneously, a shared AI will proactively intervene in the moment of silence.
Exactly. Nested loops lead to O and K pricing.
In this scenario, all the interactions with AI will be shared among both users. Users can also get AI help through an interactive interface by right-clicking on code block. Additionally, they can also get AI suggestions when running their code. The second condition is human-human AI pair programming using personal AI, in which people can still collaborate with one another, but the AI support is personal to its users. And the last condition, each human only work with AI support without additional human partner.
Okay, and here's what we found. Participants reported a higher sense of collaborative learning and social presence in the HHAI conditions compared to the baseline. And this is not surprising at all, because you're working with another human being, not just a machine, right? But to dig a little bit deeper, we analyzed all the other log data that we had. So on the left, you're seeing the proportion of AI-generated codes across three conditions that actually made it to the final code submission from the participants. When students worked alone with AI, a large share of their code came directly from the model. But in the triadic settings, the proportion of AI-generated code dropped quite significantly. On the right, you're seeing the proportion of AI suggestion uptake. In the HAI condition, participants accepted a little over 80% of the strategies the AI suggested. But in the triadic conditions, the proportion of AI suggestion used in the final code dropped quite a bit again. And we found that in the HHAI conditions, participants became more selective about what to accept from the AI. And in other words, shifting from HAI to HHAI didn't just change how much AI was used, but also how it was used. And what's really interesting and in a way quite deceptive is that these differences in how AI was used did not translate to differences in the actual programming task scores, right? As you can see here, none of these, there's no significant difference. And HAI seems to score a little bit higher. But what was different was how participants talked to each other and how they felt. What you're seeing here is a distribution of utterances we coded from the transcript across the conditions. It's a bit hard to see, but we also have this in the paper. In the human AI condition, the conversation is heavily driven by what we call information-seeking questions. Things like, what do I do next? What's the next answer? What should the setup look like? And these are short procedural speech acts directed at the AI, which suggesting more solution-seeking AI-led workflow. In the triadic conditions, we see more confirming language, more justification, and more coordination between partners. For example, acknowledgement and proposal justification both increased, and justification is essentially absent in the HCI setting. In addition, another difference that we found was how participants felt about using AI. When we asked them how responsible they felt for understanding AI suggestions before applying them, the shared AI condition stood out quite a bit. What was going on is that when both partners could see the same AI output, they felt much more accountable for making sense of the AI suggestions. And working alone in the HAI condition, or even in the triadic setting with the private AI, didn't really create that same sense of responsibility. And this could be explained by what's called the socially shared regulation of learning. In collaborative settings, learners don't just regulate their own thinking, right? They regulate goals and strategies collectively through mutual monitoring and accountability. For example, one participant said, if I see that someone is watching my AI prompts, I need to be more mature and try to understand the code first rather than just copy pasting. Another student said, there's a little bit of pressure. I don't want to be looked down upon by being reliant on AI when coding with another human. And what this shows is that responsible use of AI for learning was socially constructed through peer presence. Knowing that a partner was observing their interaction with the model made participants use AI more responsibly. But what was really interesting for me personally was that when we analyzed the transcript, we found that limited dialogue between the two partners, if there was just lesser of a human-to-human conversation going on, it canceled out the accountability effect entirely. Yeah. So to recap, I want to go back to this notion of tension between automation and augmentation in learning with AI. When AI replaces a human partner, as in the HAI condition, learning kind of risks collapsing into automation. There's a greater uptake of AI-generated code and suggestions, but reduced sense of accountability in how they're used. But when AI joins two humans, it can augment learning by preserving the social mechanisms that human pairs already provide, right? In the shared AI condition, the mere presence of another partner encouraged more responsible use of AI. So from all this, we believe one of the core ways to develop AI systems that augments rather than automates learning may be to consider designing AI that joins the table rather than replacing the human seat in collaborative learning context. Yes.
Right, how was learning defined in the study? Was it just like the amount of questions completed? Or was there any kind of like replication of other these were able to like solve their own questions?
Yeah, so we use the two metrics that we showed you in the beginning. So we use metrics that are typically used in learning sciences studies in engineering education that measures learning experience. So not just the final output, not just the learning outcome, but how learners are actually, what they're feeling, how they like the experience of learning, especially in paired context. So that the first slide was the slide showing how we measured those experiences. Yeah.
Did people like say a preference after the experiments, like whether they would have preferred to do it just with the AI if they were doing it with HHAI?
Yeah. I think there were some tensions around. So I think one of the downsides of computing education now is, AI can perfect output like none other, right? And students do report sort of this shortcutting of learning experience, and they're relegated to rote memorization, which is how they approach like lead code as well, right? And while they did say many preferred the HHAI shared as a learning tool, like in classroom settings and whatnot, but it is a more time-consuming experience. So if you're trying to complete like a problem set, if you're trying to do your homework, if you're just trying to get the output and just call it a day, then it might not be the most useful setup for you. That's why we try to focus on the learning experience rather than can you like make sure you get the best codes, the fastest, but rather than coding efficiency. Yeah. And Tawfik, who was the lead author, who's now at a startup, developed several other tools before this. And after we do user studies, many of the students come back to us and ask, can you can you host this? Can you open source this so we can use it for our technical interviews and whatnot? Yeah. Okay, to move on. So far, the first two studies it kind of examine AI as reasoning partners, systems that help people think through decisions. The last study I'm going to talk about focuses on AI as behavior training agents, specifically in the context of workplace communication. So according to Harvard Business Review, many people avoid difficult conversations at work, and poor communication is not a good idea. This is a bad idea. Why? Because it's so expensive. It costs U.S. organizations over $1 trillion annually. So we asked, how can we design AI as a behavior training agent that helps workplace managers build better communication skills with their employees over time? And we first started out by conducting a functional prototype study with managers across, military, academia, finance, tech, to learn what such a system would need to do from their perspective. And we found out that they wanted the system to consider several things. First, you need to make sure AI is a good contextual interpreter. It needs to understand your goals, conversational intent, and adapt to your individual communication style. Second, all users want realistic role play partners from the AI that could simulate difficult conversations that reflected what was going on at their work. And they wanted to customize, how cooperative, how confrontational the role playing agent was. Third, they wanted adaptive feedback, basically guidance that evolves with their progress rather than these one-off suggestions that you see in, ChatGPT or Claude. And people also wanted a system that was realistically grounded in their organization's objectives, or what they call training competencies. And along with the option to use the tool in various human AI teaming contexts, was also how they envision using these tools. For example, one participant who is a CEO of a mid-sized company mentioned wanting to use the tool during team meetings to help his employees discuss more openly about difficult client conversations. So taking all this feedback, we developed an AI-mediated communication training system and deployed it in a 10-week longitudinal study that is currently going on. And I'll show you a series of clips from our onboarding orientation workshop where my PhD student Lance is explaining what to go through when you first use the system. And this is the onboarding page.
The first time that I really was put in a leadership position that I maybe struggled with a little bit. So I was a laboratory operations manager. And so I managed operations for a small chemistry lab that measures gas samples for radioactivity, something like that. So one of my primary goals, I think, in communicating would be I would like to understand how to better communicate across generations within the workplace. I struggle communicating with employees that have much more experience in the lab than me. And I would like to improve, I think balancing empathy with directness while maintaining confidence in the decisions I need to make, or something like that.
By the way, Lance
The
is a
first time that I really was-
Lance is an excellent communicator. He is actually an Air Force major, but he is drawing from his experience that he had years ago. So after you onboard, you can generate a role play scenario to customize for training. And here's what that looks like.
The scenario develops your ability to communicate policy. Okay, so something basically what we've talked about recently, practicing assertiveness grounded in your managerial authority rather than loud expertise. So my positional authority, I guess, versus my rapport, my notional. So then you're meeting with Jordan. Here's the actual scenario: a lab technician with 12 years of lab. That's pretty accurate from what I dealt with. You've experienced quality assurance procedure. It needs to be corrected. That affects one daily workflow. Jordan has been following the current method for years, gotten good results. As you begin, Jordan seems skeptical. This stakes feel real. Okay, let's see. What I want to do actually in this case is I want to change up the scenario a little bit.
And you can customize the scenario as you see fit. And then this is what the role play actually looks like.
We have been solid on the important samples. In the case, don't use caps. In the case that we are.
So Jordan is constantly pushing back on the new changes, and Lance is trying to respond.
Log every sample, just in case. That way we might be able to track
And you can
down
see on the right panel that there's a tracking progress of sort of the conversational arc.
Okay, he's still pushing back. We're talking a lot of extra documentation. That hasn't been a problem. I mean, in 12 years, somebody said, okay. So what we have here also looks like we're in negotiation and clarification. That seems right. We're kind of in our back and forth stage. We're communicate. Looks like a communicated requirement. Okay, the coach thinks I've maintained confidence and exposure with Jordan. And so what we have here, I'll show you too. If we shrink this and open up the coach. You can pop in here. The coach has given us detailed feedback. And so it's given us kind of a rundown of play by play. I'm also going to click on this arrow right here to collapse the scenario. So it gives us a little bit more room. As I hover over, you can see there's some different areas that has highlighted as cited within our conversation as like, which is talking about the pushback. When you frame it as this way, you inadvertently invite the logic he's using, but nothing has gone wrong. So, and we can click on these to see like any messages that have, and then moving forward, get some examples on maybe how to better maybe have this. But I'm going to keep continuing to try and do this myself, and then I'll look at the end kind of how we had here. So.
Okay, so after each role-playing session, participants are able to provide an optional open-ended feedback in the system or reflection, and this is some of what we have from the early preliminary data that we've collected. One participant said, "I'm starting to realize I need to back myself and speak from my expertise without over-explaining or making everything sound polite. I think I can be more direct and stand behind what I know." Another user noticed from the role play that, letting go of the idea that I'm responsible for their emotional reaction, which I unwillingly do in real life, has made the conversation feel a lot less heavy. Others were diving deeper into what the role play helped them think about in the real life situation that faced at work. One person remarked, "I catch myself delegating tasks because I'm afraid of messing up or sounding unsure. Even in areas I know well, I feel uncertain and need time to process. I don't think fast in the moment during meetings, and that makes it hard to trust myself and speak up." So those were some of the very early feedback that we were getting. Yes. Yep.
Focus on written communication or they
Yes. Yes.
that is very different.
Yes.
You send them like a Slack message or email or something.
Yeah, so we actually talked with quite a bit of people. Our collaborators also include a former executive coach who has trained about 1,200 Amazon managers. She also works with doctors. She also trains medical professionals in how to communicate with patients. And one of the things that she envisions is, can we make this verbal interaction? And but before going there, we wanted to see just beyond before we extended the different modalities of communication, we wanted just to localize it to text to see the effectiveness and other things that I'll just talk about in 2 seconds. So we built the system. It took us quite a bit to figure out what do people want to see if this were to be a tool they would use for more than 2 months. And we grappled with a couple of open challenges. And one of the first challenges was deciding how prescriptive the AI was going to be. There are many, many, many established leadership and communication frameworks and theories that we could have encoded into the system directly. And we went back and forth a lot with the psychologists on the team about which theory, which module should sort of serve as this North Star for the AI training. But we also know as computer scientists that LLMs are trained on massive corpora of text, which means there's a good chance that the models have already ingested volumes of, leadership theory and communication frameworks. And it turns out that they have. So we were faced with the question of, are we constraining what the model already knows by prescribing what we think is best? In other words, what is the right balance between, prescribing hard-coded frameworks versus taking advantage of the model's emergent adaptation capabilities based on their quote-unquote unlimited knowledge. And after many discussions, we decided to take a minimally prescriptive approach for 2 reasons. First, we wanted AI to uniquely adapt to each participant over the 10-week period to give people a more personalized training experience. So what you saw on that right panel as Lance was demonstrating the role play, that would look different for every single user. And second, we were curious about what this adaptation would look like. In other words, how is the AI revamping its training procedure or metrics depending on what the user is, how the user is engaging with the tool? So the agent's adaptation itself became an object of study for this project. The second challenge we faced was evaluation. Evaluation when training needs to be both scalable and personally adaptive. So in traditional communication training programs, evaluation is pretty much straightforward because everyone moves through the same curriculum where improvements can be defined against a fixed benchmark. But in our setup, agents tailor the experience uniquely to each person over the course of 10 weeks. So the very definition of progress becomes a lot more fluid. So what does improvement look like when the target itself shifts with the learner? So instead of evaluating against a single benchmark, we decide to measure change over time. We track how users rate their own performance using a verified, validated metric called I can't remember PMCQ that is used to measure leadership communication skills. And we use that metric to evaluate both how the AI evaluates the participants, how participants evaluate themselves, and examine how those assessments move together across sessions. Also, at 3 checkpoints, pre, mid, post, we are also collecting feedback from the colleagues of participants to see whether improvements appear in real interactions. And this is what communication coaches like to call 360 feedback. And we also use validated metrics for this. And the goal here is not to compare users to one another, but to capture how each person's learning trajectory evolves within an adaptive training system. So I want to close by sharing briefly about where my lab's work is headed next. So far, I've focused on how AI influences individuals, through advice, collaboration, and coaching as reasoning partners and behavior training agents. But AI is now being embedded into environments that are larger in scale and structurally more complex. It's no longer just shaping one person's decision, it's shaping how organizations interact, coordinate, and make decisions together. So when AI begins to influence, things like negotiation, governance, even distribution of resources and opportunities, we're no longer studying isolated interactions with models. We're studying what I call human AI societies. The next phase of my work asks, how can we design and evaluate accountable agents within these larger social technical systems? And I'm approaching this next phase by building on my two prior foundations, understanding how language shapes behavior and designing human AI interaction. Together, the goal here is to inform how we design and evaluate accountable agents in more complex social systems. And we have several projects underway in this direction, and I'll very briefly highlight two. The first one is led by my PhD student, Buste Sarik. This project examines what happens when many AI agents interact within simulated social systems. Agent-based simulations powered by language models are, increasingly being used for policy reasoning and institutional prototyping. But right now, we currently lack methods to understand what structural patterns or biases these systems encode or produce. And in this project, we're constructing parallel simulated societies, for example, one with democratic institutions and one with more authoritarian governance populated by agents with different demographic attributes. And these agents are designed to interact over time through job markets, labor markets, social networks, civic and community participation, and daily, everyday decision making. And what we're interested in learning is how opportunities, resources, and life outcomes within these simulated societies emerge and become distributed across agents under these different institutional structures, and how language model behavior contributes to those patterns. The second project extends the HHAI research in my lab, where we're using the game of diplomacy. I don't know if you guys know this game, as a controlled test bed for studying coalition formation and negotiation in mixed human AI teams. And here the goal is to understand how different configurations of human agent teams affect negotiation, strategy formation, and alliance building patterns in competitive environments across time. And this is led by Caleb, my PhD student, who's a highly, I believe he's a highly ranked diplomacy player. His moves were covered in a broadcast that he has shared with me, and I'm excited to be working on this project with him. So yeah, this is the end of my talk, and I'm more than happy to share. I'm more than happy to answer questions and share more information about specific projects. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
In terms of your last because I described detail like with coach feedback, and you mentioned about something about like how to adapt to different user or learners behavior patterns, or I don't know whether in the project itself, are you trying to kind of help different learners develop their own way of communicating, or just trying to give overall like generic feedback? I guess in the kind of like goal of that project.
Oh, so the coach is designed to adapt to however the user wants the system to be in service for them in terms of improving workplace communication skills. So whether it's like a high level, as you said, more generalized skill building versus specific, very nuanced specific skill building, it depends on the user. But based on what we're seeing in how people are using it, it's really across the spectrum. Many people, quite a few people use it for acute incidents, I would say. Like there's this specific situation and I need to deal with this, or there's this specific person and like this is how they responded. We also have users who are copy pasting entire chats into our system. I don't know if that's and we didn't restrict how they could use it, but we do remind them of privacy privacy and personal data sharing concerns. But the way people use it seem to be quite diverse. And while people also like the role play aspect of it, I think they also like talking to an AI coach who seems to sort of be their like their shadow mentor who kind of proverbially knows what's going on with a specific difficulty that they're facing at work. So we have quite a few metrics that we're using. So because this is a longitudinal study, we're going to collect data that can be measured. But one of the things that I'm most interested in comparing is the PLCQ. PLCQ is the metric, the name of the metric. We're using PLCQ, which is used in real leadership communication training skills. We're using that to see whether there is a real progress towards how people are, whether people are communicating more constructively. Another thing that I'm interested in seeing is how after each role play session, there's self-evaluation and there's also the coach's evaluation, but there's also another evaluation where in social psychology, after an experience where you interact with a stranger for 30 minutes, you use the same metric to evaluate that interaction. And for after each role play, we're having the user use that metric to evaluate their experience talking to Jordan, like the AI agent, simulated agent, and we're also having Jordan use that metric to evaluate their experience with the participant. So there are quite a few metrics that we are using to measure what is considered quote unquote progress. Yeah.
I have a slightly related question. So there's been, my background's in language. So, there's been like a shift over time with people who are using LLMs and how they speak, and there's been a shift. I don't know if this has been formally studied. I think I've read some preprints on how people talk and like the kinds of sentence structure they've been using over time and how it's shifting with the like mass amount of casual AI usage. And I'm wondering in terms of now that people are using AI to help them guide their decision-making processes, and in situations like this, when they'll be helping them like solve conflicts at work, whether there would be an underlying trend in how people are behaving as a whole, like post being guided by AI versus pre being guided by AI. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm also someone who's really deeply interested in language. Um, I get questions kind of along the similar theme all the time after I give this talk, and my general opinion is that language is becoming very cheap. It's losing the currency that it used to have. Um, but nevertheless, words have immense power in our lives, right? I don't think words are a mere reflection of our reality. I think it's the architect of our reality, and history proves that time and time. But because it is heavily AI mediated, I think while there is a lot of efficiency around what is communicated to someone else, I think the downside of that is we've become so output oriented that we focus on the output of the language itself that needs to be delivered rather than the process involved in crafting the words that you want to communicate to another person. And that undercutting of that experience is something that as a society we're probably going to be experiencing what that means in terms of how that changes the way we communicate with other people and what it means to have how it means to experience the process of communicating with another person. Yeah. I have lots of thoughts about that, but that's the one thing I can share. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering whether like having an AI model coach you through how to react to a situation. I'm also working with a startup that's doing a life coach AI thing. So it's So it's like
Yeah.
would having like as a whole as a society returning to AI somehow how would that alter the way that we craft sentences and craft responses?
Oh, Yeah,
Cool.
I mean,
It's not like
whole-
I want like actually
like, you know, yeah. Because I think of it, Columbia College, like I'm alma mater here. They made us read 2 years worth of, it's called Literature, Humanities, and Contemporary Civilization. Me to, read me to go through Homer and like Iliad in like 2 weeks or something. And so I mean back then the whole idea of just centuries ago, the idea of communicating orally, that was your way of maintaining power, right? Like speech. Um, and memorizing like thousands of, like we lost that skill. We don't do that now, right? We can, right? So I think skill sets are going to evolve differently, and what's expected of people will evolve accordingly as well. In terms of, if your question of people having like AI coaches to give advice, and sometimes it's just the reality is that you don't have another person.
Yeah.
And one of my other studies that I didn't share today, we look at how autistic people use language model as emotional support and mental health support, because that is one of the largest use cases of LLMs in that community. And most of the time it's because they don't have access to therapy, or it's just more convenient experience when they are able to tailor it to who they are. And I think the approach here shouldn't be, we should not, like, we should just ban the use, like, right. But there needs to be a measured understanding that uh that these experiences as a whole, like as a society, it's going to change how we approach, it's going to change levels of expectations around AI, but also how we carry ourselves, I believe. Yeah. In terms of how we communicate, especially. Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, Frank. I remember when like the GPT-5 models came out, there was a very large group of people who were
Upset.
incredibly upset.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it brings up the question of like guardrails versus biases versus personalization. Like, is it,
Yeah.
if you want to marry your AI and then suddenly
It's very blurry.
Yeah.
What
what
right.
happens there versus even with conflict management. So I know several people who personally use AI to sort of not mediate conflicts with their partners or whoever, but sort of, how do I frame this in a way what this person would understand instead of going through that discussion without an AI agent there.
Right. Uh while I feel like I think attitudes around the boundaries of what AI is, how AI is useful to us, has been already shifting in the last 3 years. Like, but when it first came out, I can remember just in terms of letting students use AI in their assignment, that was just like a huge no-no, like when it first came out. But then now it's like we can't just tell them not to use it, and we need to shift our expectations. But then if we do let them use it, how can we amplify the skills and what they're already good at? Like, how can we amplify the mechanisms that that are actually useful for them to have as human beings, rather than sort of outsource it to AI? And I think that's what we have to think very critically about. So whether it's using it for, like couples mediation, you said, like relationship mediation, or whatnot, because I mean, people do that all the time. They put things on Reddit, say,
What do I do?
yeah, what do I do? Right? So that practice of asking someone outside, that has existed, but now it's but at the other end of the table, now it's not another anonymous user, it's a machine. So I think that is going to change, that is already changing how we perceive what is sort of, what used to be taboo may now be socially acceptable, to like maybe it's going to be expected and accepted more widely. But what I think we need to pay attention as we move along across that line is that what are we automating away that we don't want to have it automated away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really interesting to see where it goes in the next couple of years, because everything's been shifting so fast. When GPT came out in like 2022, I was still in college. I know, and I actually remember like the first time I saw, we had like a GPT policy in class, and I remember like vividly thinking, "There's no way that this model is so stupid. It can't write anything. Why would they put this policy in an English class?" And by the time I graduated school, it was worlds different.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
really interested to see how the generative AI models, like where research goes in the next couple of years, because everything's been shifting so fast.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a very interesting time to be a researcher, CS researcher like yourselves, in HCI, and NLP and AI, because the landscape is changing rapidly. And I think what that means is when things are changing rapidly, that means there are a lot of pain points. And I think those pain points are where we can immerse ourselves in to better understand the problem space a bit deeply. And we can afford to do that because we're researchers. Yeah.